It's the Crack House Podcast with Mike and Muskie.
All right, folks, the agony of the podcast. Hey, welcome to the Crack House Podcast, folks. My name is Mike O'Sullivan. Joining me, as always, in the Crack House is my man, Chris Muscalino. What's up, Heisenberg? How are you?
Heisenberg is in the house, man. Getting ready. Better Call Saul very soon.
Oh, yeah, that's done, right? Like, this is the last season for it and everything, or?
Yes, I believe so. He had a heart attack last year, and I think they wrapped everything up, so they should be good to go.
Yeah, I just watched his movie. What was his movie he did recently? Nobody. It was on cable. It's on HBO Max. You can watch it. It's that whole new genre of old guy beating up everybody, and he actually does a really good job in it. It's a pretty good movie. It's like your standard, the standard now old guy in his 50s can beat the shit out of everybody
Oh
movie,
yeah,
but it was pretty good. You know, Odenkirk is he's so understated as a guy and a character like that. It made the movie really good. But
I like him a lot, man. I just
yeah, he's a great actor.
you know,
He's
I
very funny, very low key. He's got like that Jason Bateman kind of quality a lot, where it's very understated, a lot of his sarcasm and things like that, which I
which
like.
kudos to you for putting me onto that, Mike. I'm about almost done with it to the point where I'm 3.5 seasons into Ozark now. So I took your advice. I binge watched it last week, and very good, man. I wouldn't put it up there in Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones or Sopranos or The Wire for me, but it's growing, man. It's
Yeah,
growing. It's very well written, and it's up there.
yeah, I enjoyed it. I didn't think I was like someone talked about it. I got into it from the beginning. They said start watching it, and so far, yeah, the shows are definitely a good show, but it is starting to, you're in the fourth season now, and it's starting to get on that roller coaster of, all right, we're in a lot of trouble, we get out of a lot of trouble, in a lot of trouble, out of a lot of trouble. But I think this is the last season anyway, so I'm glad they're not gonna drag it out for too long. So
It is, and I think we've hit on this. Where sometimes shows kind of drag on too long. You
oh
know,
yeah.
um, like you said, how many times can you get out of the same scenario, the same story? We're gonna get into trouble. We're gonna get out of trouble. But it's very well written, man. I was really surprised. I was going into it not really expecting much, but very well written. I like Bateman a lot. Um, the Israeli girl who plays I guess the one of the main characters, the Langmore girl, Ruth. She's very good. Um,
Yeah, she's a girl from the Bronx.
is she?
She grew up in the Bronx, whatever, I forget what her name is. But yeah, she's like the breakout of that whole show. Like, you knew who Laura Linney was and Jason Bateman was going in.
I
But
wasn't really aware. I mean, I've seen Laura Linney around. I mean, I just
she's
couldn't put
she's
a
been in
face
like a
to it.
zillion things, so
Yeah,
yeah.
I
But
couldn't put her face to the actress, but she was good in it. I gotta be honest with you, the Ruth girl, she's got another show on it actually right now, and I think I forgot the name of it. I saw it in the news today, and I think she's up. Oh, something about Anna
I have no idea.
on Netflix. This is Anna,
Oh, okay.
but anyway, she goes back and forth between the accents because she doesn't have that accent. She does a very Midwestern twang type thing,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
she gets confused sometimes when she goes between the parts. So sometimes she does the Ruth accent on the other show, and the other show, the Anna show, on Ozark. But listen, man, I think it's very well written. I mean, I haven't gotten to the end of season 3, but there's a lot of moving pieces. There are a lot of similarities to Breaking Bad. I know you didn't really get into it at all, but for example, that Ruth character reminds me of Jesse in Breaking Bad. You know, it's a person that comes along for the ride, really is on the bad tracks. Is kind of like a surrogate son, or in this case, a surrogate daughter for the main character, and is really sharp. You know, and is turning into like a tragic, character. You know, where she was coming from nowhere, but it seems like her life is getting worse and worse underneath Bateman.
Yeah,
You know, if
yeah,
that makes
yeah.
sense. But is that the best show on TV right now, Mike? In your opinion?
I haven't watched that. I don't know, man. I haven't watched a lot of stuff lately. I mean, I'm really. Oh, excuse me. I'm really into right now. I'm watching that. The only other two shows I'm really into right now are Pam and Tommy Lee, which I think is great. I think that's. I mean, I know it's just going to be a limited series, and Peacemaker. Those are the two. Those are the only other two shows I'm really watching. I've already taken care of Ozark. I watched those 7 episodes. I'm caught up on Peacemaker. If you're not watching Peacemaker, watch that show. If you like, I guess if you like Deadpool, you're gonna like Peacemaker. They took a character, they made it funny. It's not that serious. What's his face? Robert Patrick is great in it as the father. The guy who plays Vigilante is great. John Cena has just he knocked it out of the park on this one. I think he's great in the role. He knows how to play that like goofy kind of big goofy doofy kind of guy, and he pulls it off very well.
I liked him in it. You know, listen, it was entertaining. It really didn't really grow on me. I mean, I'll pick it up over the next couple of weeks. There's just so many things I want to watch, Mike. Um, we talked about it a little off air. Like I've binge watched Ozark for like the last week or so, to the point where I'm almost done with it and caught up. I watched the first 4 episodes of Peacemaker. You know, again, I had my thoughts on it. I mean, it didn't really, it wasn't must see TV for me, but I guess I'll go back and catch up with that. Um, what else did I watch? I saw the end of Boba Fett. That kind of got good over the last couple episodes.
Yeah, I check. Yeah, you've been telling me about it. I checked out. I want to say 3 episodes in. I
Hmm.
just never went back. And I know you, a few other people. I think Macho threw some stuff out there saying you got to dig in and watch the rest of the season. It gets a lot better. And I know I got to. I'll just eventually sit down and finish the season out.
Listen, it's a tough one. Like I think if you're a Star Wars fan, I think we spoke about it again. First 3 episodes were brutal for me. I mean, it was just like
Yeah, it
watching
was.
paint dry. Got a little bit better in the fourth episode. There's a spoiler alert. There's a CGI character. Skywalker comes back. The Mandalorian. There's like a whole episode devoted to him. And look, it's good. I mean, the last episode was kind of like a little bit of a letdown for me, but it was better than it started. I definitely don't think it was as good as the first season of The Mandalorian. Um, I'll tell you what, I'm geared up for the Ben Kenobi series that's coming up in May. It looks like it got
Yeah, that looks like it's going to be really good. Ewan McGregor's back playing the character. I think, you know, it looks like that's all we're going to see now from Disney. Is going to be Marvel spin-off shows and whatever Star Wars stuff they want to do. So I
makes
think
sense.
they,
I mean, it's a cash
yeah.
cow, so I mean,
Oh yeah, it's a license to print money. How do you not do it? So
I would say from what I've read, I think three characters going to play Vader. Vader's going to probably make an appearance or multiple appearance, from my understanding, in Kenobi. Hayden Christensen's going to play him. I guess 2 actors. Well, one guy, well, the voice is Earl Jones, but I think Prowse, the big muscle bound guy, passed away a couple years ago. So they
yeah,
have
yeah.
two. They have two guys. One guy who plays the physical Vader, and there's another guy who allegedly, when they have the lightsaber scenes or any sort of fighting scenes, they have a whole different actor for that
Oh,
as
it's
well.
probably going to be an actor and a stuntman, I guess.
Right.
For
So there's
the
going to be like 3 guys all together. Um, our friend George probably could tell us a little bit more about that kind of stuff in terms of like stuntman type stuff.
yeah. Well, did you
But
watch? Not to switch subjects up too quickly, but did you check out Pam and Tommy Lee at all? Have you watched
I
it?
did it, man. I haven't had a chance.
Yeah.
I watched the Boba Fett thing. I've been binging Ozark for the last week and a half.
Well,
I've been meaning to watch it, man. It seems pretty riveting.
let me ask you this: did you watch? You saw the Motley Crue movie on Netflix, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then you'll love this. It's almost it's got that same kind of like
Same vibe.
tongue in cheek kind of vibe about it. Um, oh, there's not too much like narration or anything, but it's just it doesn't take itself. It's another one of these shows. It's not taking itself seriously. You know what it's about. It's about their sex tape that Seth Rogen plays the character who stole the tape.
Okay.
And he's really good at him and that guy Nick Offerman play the guys who try and distribute the tape. Andrew Dice Clay shows up in this. He's hilarious. He plays a gangster. He's got a small bit part right now. I don't know if he's going to be in future episodes or not, but he was very funny in the scene he was in. He basically plays the money man behind the whole thing to get the tape out. And like these guys just start killing the tape. Like this is you got to remember, like when this tape came out, it was almost like the infancy of the internet, and it was so easy for them to hide how to like order it and like hide the money and everything else, and it's really cool. It doesn't get into it that much yet, but it was like when you ordered that tape online, it went up to like someplace in Canada. Then the stuff got faxed to California, and then they mailed it out from California, and the money was going to a Swiss bank account. It was pretty interesting. It like I said, it's really good for anyone that hasn't seen it. Go check that out. Uh, they show here was the one thing I didn't know. They were showing there's a lot of nudity in it, which I thought it was like a TV show. Yeah, but I thought it was just like a regular TV show. I didn't think they were showing that because the girl who plays Pamela Anderson, I mean, she's like a dead ringer for her, and she's great in it. Tommy Lee's dick has a fucking big part in it. No pun intended. But
I hear they named it, right?
Yeah, they do it. They actually do a CGI scene of his dick talking. It's pretty funny. So I would definitely go check that out.
I saw a couple of things related to that. So number one, I've been reading a book it's by Chuck Klosterman, who's a pop culture writer, and he wrote a book called The 90s. And he talks about, I mean, for us, it feels like yesterday, it was the start of high school, at the end of high school, the beginning of college for me, beginning of your police career, your law enforcement career. And the book talks a little bit about Motley Crue. It talks about how Nirvana and Pearl Jam and the grunge, era just basically annihilated the metal hair bands and Motley Crue and all those guys. And then it talked about the changing of technology. It talked about like VHS tapes and how things have morphed so rapidly. And that decade really set everything in motion, from the internet to like, how we communicated to like, things that we take, for granted. The woke culture had its beginnings back then. It's a pretty interesting book. And I maybe in the next couple episodes, we'll get into a little bit more as I finish it up. But the thing I found funny was that I heard about this show, the Pam and Tommy thing, but I also saw like there was some sort of feud going on between Eddie Vedder and Nikki Sixx. And apparently, I guess Vedder made some sort of comment talking about, I'm trying to be, something to the effect of, he said something, I'm trying to be nice, but I despise girls, 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 and Motley Crue. F you, I hated it, he explained. And then he said something that made the fellas look like how I hated it made the women look. He goes, it felt so like plastic. And then I guess Nikki Sixx got wind of these comments, and he went back at Vedder and he said, he goes, it's funny. He goes, I take it as a compliment. He goes, but they're one of the most boring bands in the history of rock and roll. And they've been going back and forth in Twitter like the last week or so. And it's funny because I'm reading this book about the 90s, and Vedder was kind of part of the culture that destroyed the 80s and destroyed, basically the hair metal bands like Motley Crue. And, it's funny. I'm a fan of both bands. I mean, I'm less of a fan of Vedder throughout the years because for me, I know a lot of the guys I went to college with love Pearl Jam. And don't take it the wrong way. I like them too, but he's a guy that sings about very abstract ideas, very spiritual ideas, and again, to each his own. He's kind of an agnostic or almost an atheist. To me, it's like almost hypocritical. You know, you're singing about like these abstract thoughts and spiritual type things, yet you don't believe, which is fine. But it kind of knocked it off a little bit for me with Pearl Jam in terms of, you know, how much I really used to be into them. But
Well, I mean, Pearl Jam has turned into like we've talked about this, man. They're like a glorified jam band now. They just constantly tour. I mean, could you name the last 3 Pearl Jam albums?
no, man, listen, my brother is a big musician too. I mean, you know, he's played for
No, but
years, and
no,
yeah,
I'm not shitting on. I'm just saying, like they're just like the wandering gypsies now.
no, he's Jason's with you, man. Jason is what you just said. He's been saying for years.
Like they,
Outside that first album, I mean, maybe the second album, Vitology. I mean,
yeah,
it's
you got
really difficult.
Vitology and 10, and then they turn into like this junior Grateful Dead band that,
Right.
and now he's touring without them. I just saw he's
Yeah. He's got a new song actually
I
out.
mean, what is it? I hate when guys do this, man. Like their solo because it sounds exactly like the, Pearl Jam. He's just got different backup guys. He's got a different guitar player. That's
Yeah, it's
it.
a good point, Mike.
You
I mean,
know,
Mick
most of these
Jagger
guys.
did it all those years ago, and Mick Jagger
Yeah.
sound, his solo stuff sound like the Stones. You know, he had a, he had a couple of, I guess, solo records in the mid '80s. You know, there was an infamous fight with him and Charlie Woods and what's his face, Keith Richards. And if you listen to the solo stuff with the Stones back in the '80s with Jagger, like you said, it sounds like Mick Jagger
Yeah.
with a different, a band that sounds like the Stones.
One of my favorite examples of that is when David Lee Roth left Van Halen and he put out that Yankee Rose album or whatever it was called.
Yeah.
Or Crazy from the Heat. Crazy from the Heat is a Van Halen album.
Yeah.
Because he goes and gets the greatest guitar. I mean, all right, we're not going to talk who's the greatest ever of Eddie Van Halen. He gets Stevie Vai, who's a genius as well on the guitar, and he can find a bassist and a drummer, and it basically does the same thing. Listen to Crazy from the Heat, and if I slap the Van Halen logo on it, you'd be like, oh, that's a Van Halen album. I mean,
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I agree with you
all
completely.
these guys that do that.
Well, let me ask you this, Mike: are you a David Lee guy or Sammy Hagar?
They had more hits with Hagar, but I like David because he's the showman. Sammy on stage was just pretty much stand there, sing. David Lee Roth, he's gonna wear some assless chaps. He's flying all over the place. He is. He puts on a show, but I kind of like David. But someone brought up a good point, man. Like a couple of those albums with David Lee Roth, a bunch of those songs are covers. They do
Yeah.
a lot of covers, man. So
No, absolutely, I agree. I'm probably in the minority. I got a good friend. I went to college with Amanda, who's a big David Lee Roth fan. We got into it a couple years ago. I'm probably in the minority. I kind of like Sammy Hagar more. I thought that. Listen, there's something to be said for 1984 and that whole era and that first Van Halen album. I don't think there's anything that really could top it. I just think that when Hagar came around, like you said, they had more hits. It was more ingrained, I guess, in my head, even though those were iconic things in 78 and 84. And then, what really cemented for me, Mike, I saw them in Jones Beach about 5-6 years ago. And Roth was there, and his voice just was so bad, man. Like to the point where it almost really ruined the concert.
well, I mean, all right. We'll get into this now. Then, like, have you ever seen that video? It's been out recently of who is it? Vince Neil. I mean,
brutal.
I saw them on their farewell tour. Had to be about 5 or 6 years ago at Barclays Center. And they sounded okay. Like he sounded okay. I'm sure it was a lot of it is auto-tuned and things like that. But the stuff they got of him recently, he does a lot of stuff too when he sings. He's doing the old mic to the crowd move where you're singing the lyrics, and it's
Right.
like, I didn't pay $80 for me to sing Dr. Feelgood. I paid $80 for you to sing Dr. Feelgood. Okay, dude. So, but
That's
yeah,
a great point.
he does look. Yeah, he's like all those guys though, man. They get so old, and I mean, Alice Cooper opened for him on their farewell tour.
Look, let's
And I
be
mean,
clear.
even the guy's in
When I
his
go
70s.
when I go to see these guys, like, these bands that were big during our youth and stuff, and I see them now, when I go to them, I'm not expecting the young version, right?
Yeah,
These guys
yeah.
are in their 60s and their 70s. Like when I saw the Stones 3 or 4 years ago, look, Jagger's older than our fathers. And,
Yeah.
Keith Richards looks like a freaking mummy, but the reality of it is I'm not really going to see like their looks. I want to, I want to see if they can still rock, and the Stones rocked. Another band that rocked was Def Leppard. I saw them a couple years ago at Jones Beach. Last 5-10 years, they sounded great. Who sounded really good too? Poison. There's a guy who really went through the ringer. He had a brain
Yeah,
aneurysm.
yeah, yeah. Brett
And
Michaels. Yeah.
those guys sounded good, man. Obviously they're a little bit weathered. Guns N' Roses is another band. I saw those guys. They obviously don't look the same they did in their,
Yeah.
in their 20s, but they rocked, man. And I'll tell you what, Van Halen rocked too, but like his voice was just so bad. Like I didn't get a chance to see Motley Crue, and I'm sure Vince Neil is passable. Dude, David Lee Roth was not passable. Like it was to the point where like you're sitting there in the stands, you're like, dude, this is dreadful, man. It's like I can do a better
Really?
version karaoke than this guy sounds now, and it's like you have this image of it of him in your head of dancing around, flying in the air, 1984, jump and all that crap, and
Bop, bozy, bozy, bop. Did it bop.
dude, it was brutal, man, absolutely brutal. I almost, for me, I said to my buddy Tony, who was with me at the concert, I'm like, I just really I wish they had done that concert with Hagar, because the rest of the band sounded great. Eddie Van Halen sounded great. The drummer, they all sounded great. And like his vocals were just so dreadful, man.
I worked with a guy. He actually saw. Now this is in the early 2000s, I guess.
Mhm.
Late. This is when Hagar and uh David Lee Roth both were out of Van Halen. And who was the other guy? Schiavone? Was it
Yeah.
Schiavone? Dude, David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar played a show at Great Adventure in New Jersey. They had that little concert area, and my friend saw them there, and he goes, "It was the worst, horrible." He goes, "It was one of the most horrible concerts I've ever seen in my life." Both of these guys just didn't give a shit. They said Roth was worse than Sammy. Like Roth just didn't give a shit. Like he came out, belted out like 3 tunes, didn't care, didn't move around, and left. And then Sammy Hagar came out, and supposedly there was infighting the entire time. He said it was just horrible.
No, I can imagine, man. Going back to that book for a second, though, and going back to Van Halen and Motley Crue for a moment, you know, this book, The 90s, talks about, and Rob, our Boy Scout buddy out in Arizona, he used to say this all the time. Decades don't start in like 1990 or 1980. They technically start in 1991 or 1981. That's the beginning of the decade. And this guy talks about the beginning of the 90s, the start of the 90s not being January 1st, 1990, but he talks about a date that we talked about last year, about one of the greatest release dates in record history, September 24th, 1991, where Nevermind got released by Nirvana, where Red Hot Chili Peppers released an album, where there were like multiple, like 3 or 4 huge hits that came out that day. You got to remember, Use Your Illusions came out with Guns N' Roses. So they talked about the beginning of the 90s being September 24th, because that was the signature date where all these albums came out and just destroyed Motley Crue. They destroyed Van Halen. They ended the 80s. The 80s were still going on up until like, maybe not in traditional time wise, but just in theory. And that date, the guy writes about how that date just crushed it all and just started everything in motion. And he talks about other things too. He talks about, obviously the internet. He talks about a couple other items. He talks about, the technology that changed in our lifetime. He was talking about the VHS tape, he was talking about like the whole thing about, video stores, when we were kids, how we just, got movies, think about it. Back then he was talking about like, there was only so many movies released in the movies every year, compared to now. Now think about it. You got Netflix, Hulu, you got all sorts of mediums, releasing hundreds of titles every month, for example. I think I read somewhere like in the book, like at one point in the 80s, I think there was 164 movies released in a calendar year. I mean, it was crazy, man. How much things have really, really changed when you really think about it in terms of technology. But the guy really does a great job of talking about how things really, really changed rapidly in the '90s in terms of technology, in terms of music, in terms of things how we decipher stuff, things that he talks about the attitude towards police, and I guess we're going to get into that in a couple moments, and woke culture, and you know, uh, I guess a lot of the things that have happened over the last couple of years have their roots in the '90s. The Rodney King thing. He talked about Ice Cube's and Ice T's "Cop Killer" song back in 1991 or 1992, and that was like released in relationship to the Rodney King stuff that happened that year. And he goes, the stuff that you saw like the last 2 or 3 years, you know, it has its roots in the late '90s. Obviously, it goes further back, but this stuff, it's rooted in the '90s, and it began there for the most part. Pretty interesting stuff. I mean, I really haven't had a chance to finish it up because I'm going back and forth between Ozark and this stuff, and I definitely want to get into the Pam and Tommy stuff because that looks fantastic.
Yeah, definitely check that out. The
I
Pam
just
and Tommy stuff, I would definitely. Did you? Well, let me ask you this then. So you haven't even seen the Cosby documentary yet?
No, but I find it funny. They got a documentary on this guy, and I guess we'll roll into the next topic. They got the documentary out, which I haven't had a chance to take a look at. I definitely want to check that out as well. But there's been a lot of comparisons about how, and we talked about it a couple episodes ago about Joe Rogan being canceled, for quote putting out COVID misinformation. Meanwhile, you got a documentary on Cosby, who is basically a serial rapist, went to jail, and whose stuff is all over Spotify. So that you've got the left and these people, the woke warriors, trying to cancel Rogan because quote he put out all this misinformation about COVID, but you got a serial rapist and all his stuff still out on Spotify. So
Well, I mean, that was even you could go back to like when Neil Young talked about it, and then someone pulled some Rolling Stone article where he just
oh yeah, racist shit.
it was no, it was all homophobic.
Oh right. I'm sorry. Right.
Talking about AIDS and homophobia, and I mean, he goes, "Do you really want some gay guy touching your food at a supermarket?" Like they showed the whole article and everything. So I mean, it's like everything comes back to bite you in the ass. I mean, the Cosby documentary is pretty creepy. It's really creepy to watch. Like people like the signs were there, and you watch some of the things he says on some of these shows, and where he's talking about like dropping. He was big with that thing. What was it called? Spanish Fly back in the day. He would talk about that, how it would get women in the mood. But I mean, there was like, if you watch the documentary, I think it's 4 parts, 4 episodes. He, um, it's 60 something women that come forward in this. And I mean, this shit went back into like the late 60s. He was big with hanging out at the Playboy Club, the Playboy Mansion. There was a few of the girls that worked there. They would they went back with him. He would, oh yeah, come back and hang out with me. Drop he would give them Quaaludes was a big thing. Give him a Quaalude, knock him out, and then these girls would be like, the next thing I know, I woke up, no clothes on, nothing, and he was like, all right, you got to leave. Really, I mean, it's a really sick documentary. How he just goes through it, how his wife stays silent through it, how a lot of people that kind of knew what was going on stayed silent through it. Um, yeah, if you can, it's on Showtime on demand, I guess. Check it out. It's really good.
Let me ask you this, Mike. I mean, why I was a fan of Cosby, obviously. I
Who
mean, I like his
wasn't? He
stuff.
was,
Who wasn't,
you
right?
know.
Would you have ever guessed, growing up that this guy was ever capable of this? I mean, there were some guys like, let's put it this way. If this stuff came out about Eddie Murphy, I wouldn't have been shocked. If it came out about Richard Pryor,
That's see
I
that
wouldn't have been shocked.
I see exactly where you're going, and that's they get into that in the
Right.
documentary of like, here was a guy who was trying to be like the moral compass for the black community. Like stay in school, get a job. I mean,
I would have never guessed Cosby, man.
remember
I
when he
never.
went off on Eddie Murphy Raw, when he's going off on
Yeah.
Bill, you're a filth Florin, filth Florin, I can't say what you say and suck my big MF and blah, blah, blah. They go into that. They play that clip in the documentary from Eddie Murphy.
Well, let me
How
ask you this question: Would
they
you have?
said, but
Okay.
they said he was very big with that, like calling out, especially like black comedians for working dirty. He was big with that. He was always trying to be like the family guy, the family man. Meanwhile, all this shit behind the scenes was going on. Like they talked about how on the Cosby show, he would have like 20 models in the audience and then after the show bring them back to like audition them in his dressing room.
Let me ask you this: Who would you have? What would have the odds have been for things to have turned out for him versus OJ the way that they did? Would you ever thought that OJ? I mean, prior to '94,
No.
no, right? I mean, we grew up with that guy. I mean, football star and commercials all over the place,
And here's the thing,
right?
like he was on the West Coast, OJ, which we didn't. He was supposedly like the king of California at the time. He was super well liked, the football career, the broadcasting career, the acting. I mean, I remember seeing a documentary about this years ago about him, where they said he was on the verge where people were starting to talk to him about political aspirations. That's how well liked he was. And they thought about either him running for governor or senator from California. And they said he had enough juice, no
Yeah,
pun
enough juice.
intended.
Yeah, I would agree.
He had enough juice to do it. Everyone loved him.
Yeah, no, I buy that. I absolutely buy that. I just don't know what was more shocking, as far as the downfall of him or Cosby. But
No, I think definitely Cosby.
you think so, man?
Yeah. I mean, listen, what OJ did, listen, they're both two heinous crimes, right? But Bill Cosby he wasn't America's black dad. He was America's dad. That was his line. That was his job, man. He was America's dad. There was no. It was almost like there were no racial lines when you watch those shows.
No, these
It,
guys transcended race, man. I feel. I
so
mean,
that's how I
yeah,
feel. And I mean, Bill Cosby, you're talking 60 victims. They're talking about people that didn't come forward. They think, he might have it. There might be hundreds of victims. I mean, it's terrible. Listen, man, OJ killed two people and got away with it, you know, but, I think what this guy did, the way Bill Cosby was propped up his whole career, like what he stood for, I think is just way more devastating in the sense than what like OJ was.
yeah, I kind of buy it. I mean, yeah, you know what? You come to think of it, I mean, Cosby probably had a bigger fall. Well, I don't know, man. I mean, they both went to prison. Both lives are ruined. Um, OJ technically never got convicted of the two murders. Um, you're right. Maybe more people come out. He could have been a serial rapist. Beyond what's out there. But sad stuff. I mean, I'll definitely check it out. I'll definitely check it out. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm a Cosby fan. I just going back to Rogan for a second. I just find it funny how people pick and choose on who they want to cancel. Here we are talking about these guys, and one guy's got his comedy stuff still out there. He's still making royalties. And another guy, and look, we've talked about Rogan. I'm a fan of him. I think you are too. I've listened to his podcast, and it just seems like, man, he's just right in the crosshairs. For whatever the reason is. I
well,
mean,
I mean that the video, what was it? That video that just came out recently from that girl India Ari put out the video. The video's 3 years old. Where was the outrage 3 years ago?
look, I'm a big proponent of what you're saying, Mike. I agree with that. And look, I have friends that'll disagree. They'll say, you know what, he's a racist. You know what? He's claiming that it was set out of context. He was also claiming that it was a hit job. That they have him in his crosshairs right now. I made the statistic comparison a couple of episodes ago where he's got 11 million listeners, per episode, and CNN's got 900,000, and they're in complete disarray. He's saying stuff that he really got himself in trouble by bringing two, noted physicians who talked, about, you know, varying and differing narratives than what's out there on COVID. And from that point on, he's just been, every week, you read something different. Now the Spotify guy seems to be behind him, but look, we've
Well,
encountered it we've encountered it in our own show. We've had an episode taken down. We had last week's or 2 weeks episodes, to the point where you could only get it on audio. And we apologize to the audience out there. Basically, I played a snippet of Neil Young's song, and Spotify ironically decided to keep the episode up. All our audio was up there, and Mike tried to put it out on YouTube, and YouTube censored it. They took it down for copyright, which is hysterical because we're a non-monetized show. We've never really had a problem with music for the most part, other than one other time, and it's just funny. It just it seems like these people pick and choose about what they want to censor and what they want to do, whether it's Rogan or us or whoever. And in no shape or form am I putting us in the same platform as Rogan as far as the popularity, but same principle. It's just you got a rapist out there, and he's so damn bad. I mean, what's worse, a guy who has two physicians on who gives a differing opinion on COVID, quote, spreading misinformation, or a rapist who, like you said, could have raped hundreds of women, as popular as he was, and he's still making money and he still has his stuff on Spotify. So you tell me, what's worse?
Oh no, it comes, like you said, it comes down to what side are you on, and what side is controlling. It's basically like, who's going to control this narrative. And
let's talk about the mayor for a second. I mean, it's another guy. I'm behind the mayor. I like the direction he's going in, but he made a comment like Rogan did, on the opposite side. So there's a whole bunch of outrage about, and rightfully so, about Rogan using the N-word. And here you got, the mayor, talking about his colleagues as crackers. It's like, all right, so we're not supposed to be offended. White people are not supposed to be offended by that word. I mean, I get it. For me, it doesn't bother me. I couldn't care less about it. But again, there seems to be a double standard. You're going to pick on Rogan for saying the N-word in or out of context. And here the mayor is, which, again, I'm probably sure he didn't mean any ill will about it. But he got picked up on a hot tape. And like you said, it's a couple of years old.
It wasn't a hot tape. He was pandering to a crowd. That's what it was.
Okay.
He was in front of a bunch of people trying to lay his groundwork to run for mayor in front of a bunch of, African-American people. And it's like, hey, I'll kick ass. I don't care what color they are. I'll kick their cracker ass. And that's what he said. And he had to come out. He had to own it. And he had to apologize. Rogan, I'm very shocked, apologized. I thought he was just going to ride it out.
No, man, he did the right thing. And the funny thing is,
he
Mike,
shouldn't have apologized.
No, I don't think he should have either. Maybe not. I think he should apologize for the N-word stuff, regardless if it was taken out of context. But I would say that the other stuff, look, I've listened to most of his shows. He's pretty down. He's down the middle, man. And what you heard him say, he did like a little 8-minute tape where he, kind of apologized for it. And he's like, look, I'm a curious guy. I bring in people from both sides. Look, he had a transgender person on his show a couple times. He's had people from the left on his show. He had Dr. Chopra from CNN. He brings people on. I mean, for these people that kind of jump down his throat, a lot of them, I just don't really think they listen to the show. They're just, behind the mob mentality where, they've got this guy signified as like a Trump-like character, as a right guy.
My thing with him now is like, I don't feel like defending Joe Rogan. I don't feel like talking about him in the sense of like, if you're apologizing, then you're admitting you were wrong.
Yeah.
You have listen.
But Mike, that's about money, man. That's all that is.
But
he's trying to protect his.
No, I'm sure the guy from Spotify, whatever his name is that owns it, came out and it's like, you got to put something out.
Right.
I don't know if you got to apologize, but you got to put something out there. You got to get in front of this. Listen, Joe Rogan was a multimillionaire before he got this show. Now he's super rich from this show. It's not going to stop him. The show is going to keep going. And even if Spotify got rid of him, he's got enough where he could just start up something.
He got an offer already. He got an offer from Rumble, another $100 million offer. And Rumble is a competitor of YouTube. And it's funny that, they haven't been squashed, but they're not as popular as them, but it's another way to get your podcast out there or your video out there without really less censorship. Which rolling into another point, is have you watched the Olympics at all? Have you turned
Nah,
on the Olympics at all?
nah. I
I mean,
could.
we started off with the Olympic
The only
fanfare, but
the only thing I saw with the Olympics, I read the one article. There's an American girl that's skiing for China
yeah,
or
I
like
guess she
snowboard.
converted or she went back there. I don't know what the deal was with that.
But is she coming back to America after the Olympics or is she staying in China?
I think she's staying in China, man.
Ah, all right, then fuck her. Who cares? I thought she was like born, she came here and then was like, I'm gonna go
No,
fucking
apparently, man,
come. So if she does, then I don't see what the big hoopla is. Who gives a fuck? She could stay there then.
dude, I've watched less and less of the Olympics over the last 20 years, maybe 25 years, to the point where I don't even turn it on, literally. Um, the Winter Olympics always had less of an interest than the Summer Olympics for me, but
Yeah.
even more so the last couple of years. Number one, for the International Committee to pick China as the spot, and I'm sorry, I'm not looking to offend anybody. It's really ridiculous, in terms of, number one, they're importing snow. There's no
Yeah.
real snow there,
Yeah, I
so
heard
that's number
that.
one. Now, you want to get into climate change for a second? That's a whole nother rabbit hole we can get down to, but that's number one. You got all this stuff going on, and granted, they got picked, I guess, pre-COVID, but you know, I don't know, man. There was so many. I mean, really, I mean, you have to go back to China after 35 years. I mean, but and then as far as like the events, I mean, for me, the allure of the Winter Olympics was always hockey. It's like who's really into like figure skating? I mean, I think the last time I turned in for figure skating was maybe the Tanya Harding years back in 1992, right? That's the last time I think I turned that stuff on. And really, I mean, curling. I mean, any interest, Mike?
I don't know. It's big in Canada. Canada and
Speak-
like Minnesota. I think it's huge in Minnesota for like those northern states that are like right on the border up there. I think it's huge up there. But who
Speaking of which, there's a whole thing in Canada now with this envoy, this freedom envoy, I guess, where these truckers are protesting the COVID restrictions up in Canada to the point where I think they blocked off a couple of bridges going into America, and it's kind of affecting our supply chains at this point. I think today they had some sort of judge, I guess, that is authorizing the police department up there to kind of put an end to it. But it just goes to show you, I mean, there are different varying viewpoints, from in different countries. You got Europe. There's all sorts of stuff going on there. I think people are really fed up with it to the point where,
Well, I think everyone's starting to look at it now, like with COVID, of like, all right, it's over, dude. It's over. Enough.
yeah.
You had England pretty much lift everything. I mean, even here in New York, the
Well,
the
let me ask you
governor,
this, Mike.
the
All of a
governor,
sudden,
the
all of a
governor
sudden, all these
opened up
liberal
the north.
places like here in New York and Nevada, and they're all lifting the masks all of a sudden at the same moment. What's your take on that?
I don't know. Inflation's at a 40-year high, and people want to, people, they want
Or
people
maybe,
out.
or,
They
or
want
maybe
people
these
out.
guys are scared that they're going to get crushed in the congressional races later on this year.
Oh,
That they're afraid that the economy sucks and that we're still
yeah, that's
stuck in
what
the
I'm.
mud.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this was supposed to be. I mean, if you go back, Biden, to get political, Biden said by the summer the inflation issue was going to go away.
It's going nowhere, man.
We're
It's
in.
going nowhere.
We're almost halfway through February.
I know.
So
I know.
what's going to happen? Like you said, the 2022 midterms are coming up. Now it's we got to make things right. We got to put a Band-Aid on a hatchet wound, and that's what they're doing right now. As far as I think you're going to see a lot of mask mandates get lifted, a lot of COVID restrictions get lifted, travel bans get whatever is going on to make people's lives easier. I could even see, a small stimulus check going out before the midterm
No way,
election
man.
if
No
they
way.
could.
He can't even get his bill passed. The Build Back Better bill. There's no way that happens, Mike. No way.
I couldn't see a 1,400. I could see a $500 check going out. Why not?
You
Vote
know,
for us.
there are a couple things that they did, that the other side won't acknowledge. Number one, let's talk about gasoline. We talked about it with Big Pat St. Pat, who, claimed that gas prices were kind of where they were, after COVID, prior to, I guess, when Trump took over. We're at an 8-year high, man. We're an 8-year high. He closed the pipeline, in Wyoming, and they've got all these incentives towards electronic vehicles, which is where we're going. What do you think? Simple supply and
Well,
demand.
like you said, it's an 8-year high. Watch when the elections roll around and it drops 30 cents a gallon.
Could
Yeah.
be, could be. You got inflation at 40-year highs. Stuff that we haven't seen since we were kids. At the beginning of the Reagan era, at the end of the Jimmy Carter, era,
Mm-hmm.
and listen, it's a tax. It's a tax on guys like you and me, and regular people. For the rich, it doesn't really matter. But when you go into the food store and you go to the supermarket, and your supermarket bill turns from 200 a month, 200 a week, or 200 a setting to 400, it gets a little onerous. When you're trying to fill out your gasoline tank, and you're paying 2.25, and all of a sudden now it's close to 4. It's a big difference, man. And look, I'm not going to hang it all on the Democrats and the president, but a lot of it is. He likes to point, hey, look, unemployment's at, a record low, and, we created 6 million jobs last year. Okay, that's fine. That's where we were pre-COVID. And to be honest with you, but I just, again, it's the hypocrisy of it, Mike. I just find it interesting that the mask mandates are all of a sudden in these liberal cities, and these mandates going away all at the same time.
I mean, you look at that at anything. I mean, all right, here's an easy one. If Trump was still in office, does Eric Adams reach out saying, I need federal help? Does what's her face in Chicago, Lightfoot, say, I need federal help? She told Trump no 3 years ago, 2 years
Adams,
ago.
yes. Lightfoot, no. That's my opinion. That's just my guess.
You have all these things going on. Like I said, it all depends who's sitting in the big chair at the time.
I agree.
It's gonna, like I said, everything, by the time the midterms do come around, I think you're gonna see a lot less restrictions going on, and they're gonna try and make everyone's life as comfortable as possible. So
I agree.
we'll just sit back and wait.
No, I agree. I think it's going to turn. I think it's going to be a bloodbath. It usually is. For whoever president it is, the opposite party come the midterms, they usually get a big bump. It happened during Trump. It happened during Obama. The Clinton era was notorious for that. That was the rise of what's his face, Newt Gingrich back in the day. It'll probably happen this year, and it'll probably be pretty bloody for the Democrats. The thing that I read was, and I think I brought this up a couple of episodes ago, where I do think if they could control the House, I think they'll be vindictive, and I think they'll impeach this guy. To the point where, just out of spite for what they did to the last president.
Yeah, they'll open up the investigation on his kid. They'll
Right.
really, go after him.
But going back to the city for a second, and Adams, listen, you're a little bit more in tune with it than I am. I mean, we're talking about off air. What's your take about all this crime that's going on, to the point where, like, you're walking into like CVS's and Rite Aids and supermarkets, and simple stuff. I saw Sharpton make a comment like, hey, I went to CVS and the toothpaste is under lock and key. It's getting to the point. Is it getting to the point where it's like San Francisco or places like Portland in the city, or is it kind of overdone?
Well, I've seen that one CVS or Rite Aid, whatever, that was targeted in the paper, where it was just a free for all. They finally just closed down. They just said the hell with it, and they locked the doors because they couldn't deal with it anymore. As far as all that bullshit that's going on with, like, the shoplifting and all of that, it goes back to, like, quality of life crimes, and that was one of the cornerstones. The broken window theory and the quality of life crime was the cornerstone of Giuliani cleaning up the city back in the early 90s.
Stop and frisk. Yeah, right.
As the crime went down, it kind of, like, began to loosen up a little. It stayed on the Bloomberg, and then once de Blasio got in, it was kind of no more. They kind of turned a blind eye to it, and the crime just started to go up again. And that's what you're seeing now. This is you can't blame Adams. He's a month and a half into the job, but this was the result of 8 years of, Mr. Progressive trying to make everything all right with just counselors and getting help and rehabilitation, and none of it worked, unfortunately. He didn't want people going to jail. They started this revolving door. Now you have a DA who is not on board with your police department as far as prosecuting criminals. That's just going to create more problems. You're going to release more violent criminals back out onto the street, which is in turn going to create more crime on the street. That's going to be
Yeah.
the problem. You're eventually going to, it's going to turn into a post or a daily news article of the guy that got released. It's his fourth arrest with a gun. They released him. He shot up a corner and he killed a small kid. That's where it's all going to come back to.
I read some statistics, Mike, and you'll know the areas, and we know one of them. So year over year, the biggest increase in crime, 142%. Take a wild guess. What precinct and what area in New York City?
The 114?
It's East Elmhurst. Elmhurst.
Oh, wow.
142% in Elmhurst, followed closely by Harlem at 120%. The lowest area actually declined year over year. Take a guess. What precinct? What place?
The Bronx?
Central Park.
Nothing goes on in Central Park, dude. There is a precinct.
For what it's worse, they actually had a 5% decrease year over year in crime.
But there's a precinct in Central Park that they just cover Central Park.
No, I get it.
But,
and I'm sure like back in the day, I mean, it probably would have been a little bit more striking. But, those are the statistics. The statistics is Elmhurst, where we went to, where McClancy is, high school, neighboring Jackson Heights and Astoria, worst year over year. I mean, why would you say the 114th? I mean, is it that bad there?
I would think of like Queensbridge up towards that way. I know
Okay.
it started to trend back. The crime started to spike over there. But East Elmhurst, I mean, you got Roosevelt Avenue over there. 35th, 37th Avenue can get a little dicey depending on where you are. A lot of gang activity over there. I know
Latin
from
Kings.
from the years I worked over there, there was 37th Avenue always had issues. A lot of clubs, a lot of violence at night. I mean, there's some blocks, there's 2-3 bars on every block. So 3-4 o'clock in the morning, people start spilling out. Always the propensity for violence. A lot of restaurants open late, 3-4 o'clock in the morning, people getting food, fights, stabbing, shootings, drugs. So yeah, I definitely believe it that neighborhood could definitely spike up like that. So
Something I also read in that book, the 90s, and I've been seeing a lot of stuff, pop up kind of related to this. What do you think about the nightclub industry, Mike? I guess, this book talked about how the nightclub industry has completely died since the 90s, to the point where like you don't see like these massive clubs in New York City the way that you did. And now with COVID and, all the stuff that's going on, it's kind of like even worse.
Yeah,
in the
COVID,
sense
no
that,
one, with COVID really screwed the pooch where no one.
I mean, you kind of see it like you're in the comedy business, right? You go out, you do your shows. I mean, how is the nightlife? I mean, do you see these massive clubs that we used to see?
You still see so many closed businesses in the city. As far as like giant clubs go, that's all kind of like, it's almost like an underground thing now, where you'll get the invitation through your phone or find out where the big party is at a warehouse.
Warehouse, right? Warehouse parties.
A lot of warehouse techno parties. It's all goes through the phone now. That's how it's done. But as far as
like the days of like going to a centralized location, like a Limelight or
those Limelight big club places are done. I know when I worked in Brooklyn, a lot of it was catering halls. People would just rent out a catering hall for Friday night and just have a crazy party and just pack in like 500 people at $10 a head. And
that's it. Yeah, I could see that happening. And you get food and stuff, right?
And no, it was more just booze, and just blast music.
Okay.
I mean, I did a lot of warehouses with like the EMD stuff, electronic music, where we would go into those places, and it was just a giant warehouse.
Oh, it's like raves, right?
Yeah, with like 2,000 people in it.
EDM music, yeah. I play some of that stuff.
Well, there was one place. There was one place in Queens. What the hell was it? Amazura.
Okay.
It was right by where the Long Island Railroad is at the Jamaica stop. It was a giant club, and I went in there a couple of times when we worked in there, and you had all like basically like Long Island Queens kids in there in the middle of Jamaica, and 2,000, 2,500 kids in there. So
My wife grew up on Long Island in Smithtown. There was a place called Danceteria out here, I guess, close to it. There was so many big Long Island clubs too, like that. Back in the day, CPIs, all those places out east. It just, I guess, being out here, I guess I don't see it as much here. There's very few places out here. I just was wondering in the city if it's still, the same, or if it's
no, like I said, most of that stuff now is just over the phone. You'll get, if you're following a certain promoter or a certain DJ, they just promote it on Instagram and that's it.
Gotcha. All right. Guess moving on to a different topic, away from the city and crime and politics for a second. We got the Super Bowl obviously coming up in a couple days, so me and Mike taped this early so that folks like you could listen to us without interrupting the big game. Have a couple thoughts. On a different note, I read something. This guy Jeremy Giambi, Jason Giambi's brother, committed suicide.
Yeah, I saw that.
47 years old.
Yeah,
Crazy, man.
terrible.
I don't know the ins and outs of it, but it's pretty messed up. 47 years old. He's the guy that got tagged out. I saw somebody rag on John Heyman, or the guy who wrote about this, as Giambi being known for being Jason Giambi's brother, and also the guy that was tagged out in the infamous Jeter flip play.
Yeah.
So
But I mean, that's it. That's all
Yeah.
the kid pretty much had. No offense.
But,
I'm sure he was a nice guy, but who knows?
horrible
Who knows,
stuff, man.
why he killed himself? Think about it. He was in his brother's shadow his whole career. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, man, I don't know
drugs,
what it was.
alcohol, mental illness. Who knows? So
Going into football for a second, so you got the Super Bowl coming up. I mean, I think we've been between episodes at this point where I don't even think we talked about Tom Brady retiring. He's walked away. Arguably the GOAT. For most people, the GOAT. My friend Tony and Pudge, obviously. Me, no. And you got Joe Burrow, maybe the next Brady. I guess against the Rams, 4-point underdogs. I'm gonna rock with the Bengals this week, Mike. Harking back to the days of Ickey Woods and
well,
Nicky Shuffle.
they dusted him off and brought him back.
I saw.
He's down there, or he's out in L.A. I guess they brought him out for good luck. The Ickey Shuffle. It didn't help the last time.
Well, they lost to the Niners both in the '80s. They lost in '81 with Ken Anderson, and then they lost with Ickey and a Long Island local, Boomer Esiason, Norman
Esiason. I don't
actually. We one of our deans from St. John's. For those who are from St. John's watching the show, there's our dean Frank Severino was on the Bengals, the '88 Bengals. He filled in. He was a nose tackle who filled in for the guy who broke his leg.
Oh, that first play, the guy broke his leg.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, that was back in the day. You're talking almost 35 years ago, right?
Yeah.
88, right? And what else we got with football? So we got the Rams against the Bengals. Bengals are 4-point underdogs. You got Odell out in LA. I'll tune it in. I'm hoping it's not as bad as last year's. I mean, if you remember last year, between the commercials and the show, the halftime show was just dreadful. Hopefully, I think with COVID kind of waning out at this point, I think people are going to be a little bit more into the party scene and stuff, and having maybe people over their houses and going out and kind of a little bit getting back to normal.
Well, they tried. It looks like they're trying really with this halftime show. Dr. Dre, Eminem, Snoop Dogg. They're going back to that. They're trying to catch that Gen Z heat, or whatever you want to call it. They're trying to catch the Gen Zers to really watch this. Because, I mean, if you talk to a 22-year-old kid or a 23-year-old kid, they don't give a shit about Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, or Eminem at the half.
No, they don't, and they don't give a shit about football either, Mike. For the most part, these millennials are a completely different animal than where we were.
They just want to play Madden. They could care less.
Right? No, it's different, man. And we talked about it with our kids. They're more into video games and different things than traditional sports. But this guy Burrow, they're talking about being a link to that generation. He seems to be in tune with that generation, and he's garnering interest. He's got a little personality on this kid. He came up really poor, but I guess he's kind of like an arrogant, smug guy. He's got kind of like that attitude going on.
Yeah,
he kind of relates to the millennials.
Swagger. What's he wearing? Like a fur coat and a
fur coat, and he's got like a little
chain.
Joe Namath stuff going on, and the chain, and he seems like a good enough guy. But I think he does. The NFL is kind of playing on him to kind of draw in the millennials with his personality. So we'll see. We'll see. We also got. Oh, we forgot to bring up WHOOPI. How can we miss WHOOPI? Making the anti-Semitic comments, and then doubled down on it. And I guess she got suspended. And
then someone grabbed her and said, "Listen, you're going to shut up, apologize, say you misspoke. Now you're That's the new thing now. When you fuck up,
I misspoke.
No, it's not misspoke, and now you're educated. Because that was the whole thing with Rogan. The Rock came out and was like, "Yo, Joe Rogan's my man," and then they played that video, and he's like, "Oh, I just got educated. I have to go back."
So, like, if we say anything stupid, and me in particular on this podcast, Mike, can I just come on and say I'm educated and
you were educated? Who was the other guy? Who was it? The Baby? Remember when the Baby came out and said all that shit? Dude, he got dropped from that tour, and the next day he had a tweet.
Dude, we got to.
I'm educated now, man.
We got a guy in our. We went to school with Steve Bennett. He's a DJ now, actually, for many, many years. He moved down to Texas, and we're in many DJ communities on Facebook. So there's one in particular that we are, and the guy who's ahead of it, I'm not going to name him because I really like him and I like the group, but he went all in on the Baby. So he's from North Carolina, the guy, and so is the Baby. And I guess when the Baby was in Florida, he went off on homosexuals. He just said some really off-color stuff that was really nasty towards them. And they try to cancel him, and this guy in the DJ group was all over the Baby. We don't stand for that. We don't do this. We don't do that. It's like, dude, look, I get it. What you said before, just pandering, man. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying what the guy said was right, but stop, man. You've supported people. You've supported artists throughout the years that have done a lot more heinous shit than talking negatively about the homosexual LGBT community. Let's call it.
But that's what you have to kind of do now. If somebody comes out, like, all right, just for example, the whole Joe Rogan thing, there's either going to be a lot of people that hate him, that have to say something, that have nothing to do with Joe Rogan, and then you have a bunch of people who are going to defend him as well. But like, it seems like if you want to stay working in show business or Hollywood, and you're at some level, and like the Rogan thing comes out, you're like, oh, well, I think what he said is completely, you could have nothing to do with it, but you just got to show that you're the ally on the right side of everything. And then, that's what happens. You get to look at what was her face? Cheryl Hines and her husband.
Yeah.
Kennedy. She had to publicly come out and decry.
Well, he's a congressman, or he's in politics, and he's very anti-vax. He's very, very he's a very conspiracy type guy, or anti-narrative guy. My bad. I shouldn't call it conspiracy stuff, because for some people there is some truth to it. And just like you said, if you happen to be on the wrong side of the narrative, you kind of get shut down. Whether it's by big tech or whoever. I don't know, man. We've kind of beat it into the ground over the last year and a half. I think it started with the president at the time getting censored by social media, and you're at a point now, man, where I think it's open game. I think, like you said, I think you got to be ultra careful about what you say. But I think we're going to use that, Mike. I think we're going to use that phrase. If me in particular get out of line, or if I say something, Mike, I was educated.
You have to get educated.
I apologize.
As long as you're educated now.
If I'm educated, I'm good, right, guys? I apologize for anything I've said previously that has offended anybody. I'm now educated. Me and Mike are educated. And by the way, sorry, YouTube, about putting Neil Young. We didn't realize the guy singing about rocking in the free world would have a problem of us starting off a very small podcast that's not monetized as an intro song. So I'm educated now. That won't happen again.
We're educated about getting educated.
And lastly, how about this couple that going back to crime for a second, $3.6 billion in 2016 in Bitcoin. This Russian guy and this rapper girlfriend, Heather Morgan,
Mm-hmm.
and Dutch Lichtenstein, 4.5 billion in crypto that they hid for about 6 years. And I'd be curious to see those in law enforcement figure out. I asked you this off air on how they got caught. You said you gave me a little bit of details, but figure 6 years into it, the guy in Ozark, you're pretty much,
Yeah, I would have thought the guy was
in the clear.
done. Yeah. But I mean, you just keep it's one of those things. Keep following the money, keep following the money, keep following the IP addresses or whatever. Listen, man, there are agencies that have people who are so into computers, like that's their entire job, is to know every in and out of a computer, how to create fake accounts, fake websites, things of that nature. And they got figured out, I guess. That couple screwed up somewhere where someone caught the mistake
Well,
and was
man,
like,
listen.
here's where they are.
I mean, listen. Let's call it what it is. The government's getting wise to it. The days of laundering money through cryptocurrency is coming quickly to an end. And I don't know if you know it, but like even things like Venmo and stuff, like you have a transaction more than $600 in your account, you're going to get a little call from the IRS. You're going to get at least a couple questions from your accountant at the end of the year trying to figure out where this money is going. So I can't imagine like on a much bigger scale trying to, launder millions or billions of dollars, But that's for another day. And then let's see, what do you make of the free crack pipes, Mike? Or should I say smoking kits that have been given out?
Is that what they're calling them now? Smoking kits?
Smoking kits, Mike.
Well, I mean, you can probably use them for crack and meth. So yeah, I guess call them smoking kits. $30 million that they're gonna. I don't know. I think it's very stupid. Like I said, we go back to the quality of life stuff. Your crackheads are the ones, and drug addicts. Those are the ones who are doing the shoplifting, doing all the petty larceny stuff, the low level strong arm robbery stuff. Those are your people.
Well, what do you call it in law enforcement? Gateway crimes, right?
Whatever you want to call it. Yeah, you can call it gateway crime or
right.
It's the low level stuff. It's the stuff that makes your neighborhood shitty, and those are the people doing it for the most part. And now you're gonna help them with their addiction, which is ridiculous.
And the crazy thing is these people, these politicians, and without naming anybody in particular, it just seems like these shitty areas that they come from, they all run and they go to different areas where there's no shitty stuff going on. And meanwhile, the people that, in these neighborhoods are suffering, whether it's the defund the police stuff or, this low level, bail reform shit that, is affected, people being released, 9-10 times and doing heinous shit. They have to go over and over again because they don't want to crowd the jails and because it's, whatever, man.
Yeah, we'll see.
At the end of the day, it's like it's regular people that suffer. People in Elmhurst, where we went to high school, people in Harlem, regular neighborhoods, man. Regular people that get affected by this stuff. And meanwhile, it just seems like the people that are, advocating for this, it doesn't affect them.
Yeah, exactly. I guess we'll wrap it up on that.
Wrap it up.
Wrap it up, B. What plugs you got?
We got the usuals, Mike. We got Jay Cristiano, Cardinal Financial. I think a lot of people are a little bit late to the party, man. The Fed is raising interest rates 3 times this year. We're seeing a really big pullback in the stock market, so it might be a little bit late to get those super low rates. But if you're in the business of buying a house or refinancing, call Jay Cristiano at Cardinal Financial at 844-442-7334. That's going to be extension code, promo code 4215. Throw me and Mike's name out there. Jay will make sure to take care of you quickly. We have Vlad, my boy, Vlad Frederic. You got his bistro, Vladdy Innie's Bistro on 53 Bruckner Boulevard in the Bronx. We got me and Mike's childhood buddy from the MAC, Celtic Monkey, Mike Power in North Carolina. If you're in the North Carolina area, I believe he's in Wilmington. Check Mike out. He's a great guy. We went to school with him. He's been a bartender for many years. So check out his bar down in North Carolina if you make it down to that part of the country. You got my buddy Eugene, my big brother from St. John's at Pile Defy. Got Piazza's Pizza in Rye, New York. Eugene's open for orders. His telephone number is 914-921-4444. He's got a great catering business too, so I think he makes deliveries. Actually, pretty far, if I'm not mistaken. So give Eugene a call, hopefully for the Super Bowl too, if you're not already taken care of. You got Tommy D's place, the Mad Donkey, 36th Avenue in Astoria, Queens, New York. And also 5-Star Shopping by Tommy's, which is at 917-559-8264 for any of your shopping needs. We've got me, DJ Chris Clash, www.djchrisclash.com. Check me out. Slow period of the year. So if you need anything, let me know. I've had a couple parties recently. COVID's coming to an end, hopefully, so we can get a lot more busy. And lastly, we got 2 bands that I'm following. We got our 50th birthday coming up, Mike, so I got some plans later on this summer that I'll hit everybody up with, and you as well. But 2 bands in particular, O.L. Moore and LimeWire. Check them out. They're cover bands. O.L. Moore does covers of like 70s and 80s hits. They're really great. Their next show, I think, is going to be the Peconic County Brewery on February 12th and Napper Tandy's in Smithtown, March 12th. You got the LimeWire, who is actually playing tonight. I'm going to try to make it to their show after we close up tonight. And I'll have some dates for you coming up with them as well. Really 2 great cover bands. Check them both out if you're in the area, especially on Long Island. And we're good, man.
All right, just a few of my usuals. Check out Jack at I Can Paint. Pat Dixon has got a new thing coming out. He's on the Locals channel. You can look it up, Google it. It's just like a community of podcasts. He's got his New York City Crime Report on there. He's also got Compound Media with his stuff. And that's about it. Maybe some new stuff, some new announcements next week with me and Pat, and maybe he's doing the show. Other than that, enjoy the Super Bowl. We'll see you next week. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.